Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Saturday night interview. We're doing an interview with another one of my favorite characters. So far we've had two of my favorites. We had now she's calling herself Alpine Preparedness, but it used to be Van City Preparedness. And another one of my absolute favorites is Prepping by Faith. Tonight we're doing Prepping with Sarge, and golly, you talk about a font of knowledge, and I am so jealous. He knows more about foraging than I can ever imagine learning about foraging. Gosh, it's just I don't know if there's enough room left in my mind to come up with what he knows. I'm going to ask him to introduce himself here real quick and give us a little bit about what he does for a profession, which is extremely interesting to me. And we're going to have another hour talking with Prepping with Sarge, particularly about his profession and how it relates to a post-apocalyptic world. So, Prepping with Sarge, if you tell us all about yourself, please.
Thank you so much, Lee. Appreciate you. You've been a really good friend to me, and I really appreciate our friendship. And I know we'll probably see some mutual friends here in the chat tonight. I think a lot of people that we've seen so far I'm already familiar with. But for those who haven't met me before, I have a YouTube channel. I'm also on Instagram and Twitter, and more recently even on Facebook as Prepping with Sarge. So you just search by that on any of those platforms, and you'll find me. I have been I've been prepping since before we called it prepping. Like I think that term probably came around with that show Doomsday Preppers, as far as I can tell. We never called it that before, but I grew up gardening and did the Boy Scouts thing. Was really into wilderness survival, and that's where I started learning about like foraging plants and things like that. Started to take a big interest in that. So I'm about 50 years old, and if that gives you any idea, and I started gardening at 4, so pretty much I've been doing this my whole life. Sarge is not a military title or a police title. It's just a nickname I picked up in college. If you follow me on my channel, I tell the story of how I got that nickname. Just to clarify, it's not. I did not do any service in the military. I'm not a police officer or a firefighter or anything like that. In fact, my primary trade is I am a licensed therapist for mental health, and I've been doing that for over 25 years. And right now, I'm mostly working with a lot of first responders, doing a lot of trauma work. But over the course of my career, I've worked with pretty much every population, from little kids to seniors, severe illness to runaways, pretty much children with autism, you name it. But right now, my current population that I'm working with is primarily made up of first responders.
And the trauma that the first responders are exposed to, is that primarily your primary concern?
That's what we see probably the most of, for sure. There are not everybody who gets exposed to trauma gets what people commonly call PTSD. There's different levels of it. There's different diagnoses within the trauma spectrum that people can get that are a little bit less severe. And even with post-traumatic stress disorder, a person can get post-traumatic stress disorder and still be very, very functioning. They can continue with their career. It can be, with a little bit of treatment, a little bit of coping skills, and a good support system. It's definitely something that people can learn to manage. There's things that we can do in the field. We'll probably get into this more when we do that other stream, but there's things that we can do to get your symptoms way, way down in most cases. So, I love the population. I'm really excited. I feel like it's a privilege to be able to serve the people who serve our communities.
And I'll tell you what, I am just compared to when I drove ambulances 50 years ago, and the skills that I had compared to the skills that they have today, it's just unbelievable. I'm sure we're exposed to the same things. I think the most traumatic for me was children.
Yeah.
And, gosh, that's in the past.
Well, just real briefly on that, Lee, people always ask like big T, little t. That's kind of how we talk about it behind the scenes in the field. Big T would be like a big trauma. Little t would be like a little trauma, right? So that's going to vary from person to person. But to give you a general idea, like a car accident where you might have sustained an injury but nobody died would be like a little t. And a big T might be where you witnessed some pretty big violence or like you said, a child was hurt. That's generally considered a big T. If somebody you know dies in front of you, that's a big T. If you watch somebody in the process of dying, that's a big T. So, obviously sexual assaults too would be a big T, things like that. And then the little T's would be like, when I was 5 years old, I got lost in the woods for 2 hours, but I was okay. Nothing bad happened to me. Right? I got scared for 2 hours. That'd be like a little T.
Yeah. Great. Well, let's kind of start this off with that show, the Doomsday Prepper.
Okay.
And I think one of the things we do wrong as preppers. So I've been doing this since the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis. And things have changed over time. And we used to call ourselves survivalists. And then all of a sudden, this movie Rambo came along, and so survivalism changed from being in a cinder block fallout shelter in your backyard to somebody Ramboing out in the forest with this knife that had everything in it that the world could ever imagine. And so you kind of had this schism between what we might call prepping, which was the hunker down people, and the survivalist, which was the Rambo bug out guy. And the language started to change too, because to me, it was originally hunker down and then somebody's going to bunker out or bug out. And now it's kind of like, that little mark, that little thing that's underneath the question mark on your keyboard, it's a slash mark. But then they invented this computer thing called a backslash.
Yeah.
So people can't differentiate between a slash and a backslash. So now we have to call it a forward slash and a backslash.
Yeah.
And so the same thing. So now you can't differentiate between hunker down and bug out. You have to have bug out and bug in. And to me, bug in means run away to where you already are. So the language has changed. Then we come along with the third group that kind of is splinters off, and that's kind of the homesteader. So I see there have been these three big schisms in what I've seen in the prepping community over the course of time. Hi, Alpine Preparedness. And we were just talking about you. Hope your ears were ringing.
Yeah, we had some good pre live stream chat going back there, and I did see your question there. I think it was Triple G. I'll try to come back to that in a minute. Yeah, GGG Farms. I saw your question. I'll come back to that in a second. So there's definitely subgroups within self-sufficiency. Like I guess that would be maybe the big umbrella, right? And I touch on all of that stuff on my channel, which some people have said I should really kind of niche down. But it's hard for me to. I got started with the gardening, so like my channel is about things that I love, and it's going to touch on stuff that if you're a homesteader, you're going to find parts of my channel that you like, and maybe parts of it that you're like, I don't care about this video, right? And that's okay. And because I did a lot of the wilderness survival stuff in Boy Scouts and really took a liking to that, I hit on some of that stuff, and I hit on the kind of some bushcrafting stuff in there too, foraging, things like that. And then prepping, like that kind of encompasses things like storms and recession and things like that. So my channel really is kind of hitting on all of that stuff.
And that's why I think I like it when there's somebody who knows a little bit about a lot, and maybe even a little bit more than a little bit, who is very well versed. Let's put it that way, in a broad range of topics. But let's see if we can focus down. One of the biggest problems I have in talking preparedness as a general theme with other people, and I see so many contentious arguments take place. For example, we'll talk about the value of silver. And if people don't announce ahead of time, my primary concern is X. And I'm talking about this point of the timeline, because I think different things are going to have different values depending upon where you are after whatever event it is that you're planning for.
Sure.
And the other thing we have to clarify is, what are you preparing for and what am I preparing for? Because they may have different values.
Right.
The example I give is in a financial collapse, the Geiger counter that I carry in my everyday carry bag can't be eaten, right? Which is the common I guess, trite expression for has no value.
Right.
So let me ask you the big question, and that is, what's your biggest concern? What are you prepping for?
Well, to jump back, I'll get to that one. To jump back just a second, so we were talking about the Doomsday Preppers before. Now, I am apparently blocked from being able to comment on the Nat Geo YouTube channel because I've made a comment. I knew somebody who was on that show, and I know a little bit about how the inside of that show works. And I commented about that, and apparently they didn't like that, so now I'm no longer allowed to comment on their channel.
Really? Wow. Well, I was kicked off of Facebook. I still don't know why. So,
So what? Just a little bit of behind the scenes thing. Like, they always started that show with like, "What are you prepping for?" And
yeah.
I'm prepping for a tsunami. I'm prepping for the great comet that's going to obliterate life on Earth. And the person that I know said when I asked him that question, he said, "Well, I'm not prepping for any singular event. I'm prepping for times of need, times when I may not be able to get stuff that I need, medicine, food, whatever." And they were like, no, say you're prepping for this. And he said, no, that's not what I'm doing. They're like, yeah, say you're prepping for this.
Yeah.
And he's like, I'm prepping for that, XYZ. And he's like, okay. And then they're like, okay, take that. That's a cut. And so that's literally how that worked behind the scenes. So I know this guy. He's a good guy.
I got a call from you.
He's a good guy, but they painted him in a way that made him look not great, and so I can only imagine that probably happened with some other people too. But I invited him on my channel, but he did not want to go public with it. I think he was a little bit worried about repercussions for that or whatever.
I can understand. Now, Jason was on a.
I heard that. I don't remember that episode. I need to go back and watch that.
And then Southern Prepper 1 was one of the judges.
Okay.
So, so we do know a couple guys who are there. But anyhow, let's get back to you.
So
what would you say your focuses are? Or your
right now, recession for sure.
Recession for sure, yeah.
That's my biggest one. Longer term, I am worried about, the political schisms in the United States. I think we're just drifting further and further apart, and the middle is disappearing. So it's hard to imagine that that's not going to lead to some awful conflict at some point. I hope not. I'm somebody who tends to sit more in the middle than either side. So I hope that it never comes to that. It will be violent and awful, and many, many people will be hurt. It's hard for me to stand when I hear people say, "Well, all right, let's get it on then." I'm done with arguing. That's a hard thing for me to stomach because I abhor violence. I'm a healer by trade. I'm a healer.
Yeah.
I did some martial arts, and when I did martial arts and I would do sparring and stuff like that, I felt bad if I hit my opponent too hard. I'd get a good punch and I'd say, "Oh, I'm sorry," So I'm not, I'm just not inclined that way. So it's hard for me to think to that. Of course, if it comes down to it, I'm going to defend myself just like anybody else, but certainly not my nature to be like that. So that's longer term. I'm worried about that stuff. We certainly have people outside of the United States who hate our country and have the ability to do a lot of damage to our country. So that's another concern as well.
It would not surprise me if a whole bunch of them have not crossed the border without our knowledge. I know that there's a whole bunch who have been caught, but I think there's even more who have not been caught.
Well, there was a story that kind of got buried by the media a couple of years ago. I don't know, maybe some people in chat will remember this, but there was a cell out in the desert where this guy was training kids to do some. I mean, I don't want to say words that are going to get this video flagged, but to do something awful, if you get my meaning. Yeah. And Gotti Schwartz was like one of the only media people that was trying to cover that story, and he dug and he dug and dug for weeks and could not get anything beyond the surface level of the story. Like, was anybody aware of this person and what they were doing out there? Was how was he getting funded? Who was he affiliated with? And eventually the story just got buried.
Yeah. And that wasn't very far from my hometown of El Paso.
So you know what I'm talking about then.
Yep, yeah. Yep. So, that does exist. And of course, being in the military, we had, we called them suitcase nukes, but they weren't. They were a little bit bigger than that. They actually had to wear a backpack, but we call them area denial munitions, ADMs. And so the idea was that if the Soviets came across the border, there were only two areas in the U.S. Army area where they could cross a regiment abreast. And so if we threw a suitcase nuke in there, we could irradiate the area, have it button up, and we'd have a defensive advantage. Then in 86, I think we did away with all those. But we never verified that the Russians or Soviet Union did away with all theirs. And they had some missing inventory in 1991. So nobody knows where that is. So that's a concern as well.
Jack Spirko had somebody on that was like a retired high-level government person that said that there's between 12 and 20 Soviet-era nukes that are not accounted for.
Yeah. So let's take your financial collapse scenario, and let's say that there's somebody in the chat who has just come to their senses and started preparing in the last 6 months. What would you say would be the first things that you would recommend to them to prepare for some sort of financial collapse happening in the next 6 months, let's say?
Food pantry first, absolutely. Food pantry first. Try to get at least a couple months worth of dry canned goods and spaghetti, rice, things like that, stored away. A way to purify water, for sure. And then start cracking away at your debt, especially anything that's high interest, like credit cards.
Yeah.
Get that down as fast as you can. I know times are really tough. Inflation is squeezing everybody. I get it. It's hitting my family too. Try not to use your credit cards if you can. It's you just end up hurting yourself in the longer run. Figure out anything else you can, find it as cheap as you can on your food, or grow what you can, or forage what you can, or get a second job if you can, if your lifestyle allows for that. But try not to use those credit cards right now. It's just the rates are going to be insane.
Well, and I'm going to take a contrary opinion on that. And we're going to be parallel, but it's slightly contrary. And I'm going to say, find yourself a credit card that either gives you cash back or gives you some sort of rewards, and then only charge on a monthly basis what you can afford to pay off at the end of the month. So if you typically go to the grocery store and you write a check for $100, then go to the grocery store, get yourself a cash rewards credit card, charge that $100, pay it off at the end of the month, but get that cash back or those points back or whatever those rewards, so that actually you're putting your money to use while you're charging. But don't charge more than you can pay back. What Prepping Sarge is saying about maintaining a balance and having to pay any kind of interest on it is insane. Don't do that, especially with what we're looking at now.
Yeah, and you're right. You can get ahead of the game if you're very, very disciplined with that. And the key is, like you said, try not to put stuff on there that you're not going to pay off that month.
So let me see. I think. Oh, I'm trying to get a look. Move your hand.
Me?
Yeah, you do have a crystal ball right there in front of you. So where do you see us a year from now?
Further in recession, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You think we'll make it into a depression?
It's going to depend. So I think it's going to depend on how many layoffs we start seeing. Now, you saw the tech industry is already there's massive layoffs coming. That's just first round.
Yeah.
There's going to be, tech is going to get hit really hard. So, if you're out there's really no such thing as a recession-proof job. There's maybe recession-resistant jobs. But so just kind of think about, we've been through this many times. Like, I can think of, just since I've been working, the dot-com bubble burst, right? And we had 2007 to like 2010-ish or whatever. So this is like the third major recession since I've been in my career. There's certainly been other ones in my life, but since I've been in my career. And so it does pass, but you don't want to be in a bad position when it's happening. You want to have as little debt as possible, as much savings as you can, and keep your bills down to a minimum. So I know everybody's probably already doing this, but if you're not, how many streaming services do you have, right? If you have 10 streaming services, do you need to have 10, right? things like that. Start just making some of those decisions now so you can get ahead of it a little bit. I am still, not financial advice or anything like that. I'm not a financial advisor. I'm still in the stock market. I have assets in there. I have assets in precious metals. So I wouldn't encourage anybody necessarily to take their money out because it's dropping. If you didn't take it out before the crash, you're only taking a loss now. So you might as well sit it out. It will presumably come back at some point, and you don't want to miss that rocket ship when it takes off, because when it comes back, it tends to come back really, really fast.
We were talking backstage, and there's a little bit of a faith-based here between the two of us as well. And and one of the things that we have to avoid, extreme avoidance, is greed. Mm-hmm. So I was one of those Dellionaires. Worked for that 4-letter company that rhymes with the working environment. Mm-hmm. And but anyhow, I had quite a substantial amount of money, and when I left the company, I invested, and then all of a sudden, the stock went up to $68 a share, and we'd had 6 consecutive annual splits, and I mean, I was rolling in the dough. Mm-hmm. And then we were given stock options and stock grants for performance bonuses and everything else. I had a lot of money. And then it got to $68 a share. Then all of a sudden it got up to $120 a share. When it got to $120 a share and we were looking at an imminent split, I went to my broker and I said, give me 10,000 shares of Dell on margin. Well, Dell went from 120 to 54 overnight. Oh. And so I had a margin call.
Yeah.
And along with the margin call, I was invested in these other companies. I was invested in the Pink Panther, Owens Corning Fiberglass. And they were going to do the fiber optics for the Trans-Pacific cable. And so that company kind of went down. So both of those went down. Mm-hmm. And then there was this company down in Houston that promised to make me into a trillionaire.
Yeah.
And it was a big Ponzi scheme, and they went down. So instead of being the wealthy person I was, overnight, I owed Prudential Services $2,000 a month for about 5 years.
Oh man!
To pay everything off. So one of the things I'm going to tell you is, whether it's in a downturn or whether it's in an upturn, don't get greedy.
Yeah.
Be satisfied with what the Lord has given you and make the most of what you've got.
Yeah. And I don't mess with options either. And I wouldn't recommend that anybody, unless you really know what you're doing, because they're super high risk.
Oh, tell me. I don't mess with options anymore either.
Yeah.
So one of the things, if we take a look back at 1929, 1931, there were actually 2 different cycles. So we had, the first was the recession of 1929, and it went down, and everybody kind of had their scare, and then it kind of made a small recovery. And it was on its way back up in 1930. And then in 1931, we had Black Thursday. And that's when the stock market really collapsed. Mm-hmm. And we went down to 25% employment rate and everything else. And I think the only thing really that got us out of the Great Depression was World War II.
Yeah. And that is a tool that is often used to get us out of serious recessions. So certainly don't put it past our government to use that tool as well.
So do you see this cycle, in your opinion, do you see this cycle of recession, recovery, depression possibly happening again? Or do you think that we're already into that second downslide?
I mean, I think we've been in a recession, despite what the media wants to say. We actually met the marker for it back in like June. It's two consecutive quarters with a
negative
GDP. Yeah, and then they changed the definition of what a recession was because wasn't convenient. So we've been in
that.
Yeah, we've been in a recession. Whether or not they want to acknowledge that, it's true. Could it go to a depression? Again, I think that depends on how many layoffs we see. Right now, I think we're in like this Christmas bubble. There's a lot of spending going on, and they've said that consumer spending is really high right now.
I'm not so sure I believe the 3.7% unemployment rate right now either.
Yeah.
we've redefined unemployment and who fits into the unemployment category so many times. We've redefined which indicators point to, oh, come on, help me.
Well,
what we're experiencing now with the increase of inflation.
Yeah.
We defined the characteristics of inflation, redefined it so many times just to make the administration, whoever's in power,
right,
and not just this administration.
Both sides play this game. Exactly.
Yeah. We redefine it to make ourselves look good. Yeah. We redefine who's employed, who isn't employed to make ourselves look good. Yeah. I don't know. It's difficult to determine whether or not to believe anything we're hearing.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I couldn't agree with you more there, Lee. The unemployment numbers are definitely wonky. There's during the pandemic. Sorry, I almost said the C word, which I don't know if YouTube is allowing that or not. Now you can never.
I don't think so.
During the pandemic, a lot of people did career changes. A lot of people left the workforce and started small businesses and things like that. Okay. My wife being one of those people. And I started a small business, but I also stayed in my primary business. So you've got millions of people in that category that aren't going to show on that rolls, but they're not necessarily making enough to get ends meet, especially usually when you start a small business. It takes 3 years to become profitable. That's the norm. And so you get a lot of people in that category. You get a lot of people probably have been doubling up, if you know what I mean. I think they talk about that in some of the books about like maybe they're living with their parents or they taking in somebody else that's helping with the rent a little bit to kind of cover the costs, things like that. So you've got a lot of that kind of stuff going on, which is masking the true numbers, in my opinion. Now, what do I base that on? Well, it's anecdotal, but everybody in my area of the woods, right now, South Carolina survived. So far has survived this recession better than most of the other states. But everybody that I know, every employer is hiring and saying, we're not getting enough applicants.
I was talking to a guy at McDonald's just the other day. $15 an hour to start, unskilled labor, and they can't keep a full shift.
Right.
So unbelievable.
So if everybody is working according to the unemployment rate, right, then why is everybody hiring? It doesn't add up.
No, it doesn't.
Yeah. Let me say in politics, fuzzy math.
So I think I'm still back here on this triple G question. So I want to focus on it here pretty quick.
Okay.
But at the same time, I know I have a couple moderators here. And one of the things I really firmly believe in, I used to have a Saturday night help each other grow. And it wasn't being as successful as I hope it was, as I wanted it to be. But if I could ask my moderators, number one, just do me a favor, and everybody who's in here tonight, share the link of that person. And if everybody else could follow that one person, we can help each other grow. We can follow each other, follow what we have to say, support each other. I know we have a small group of people here who are very close. We follow each other almost religiously. And we've got this very good tight circle. And as we expand that circle and as we make it have these contact points, for example, Apartment Prepper, who is now known as Navigating the Nonsense. Yes,
Navigating the Nonsense. I almost said not putting up with the nonsense.
But anyhow, she is a member of a different circle that's Toolman Tim. And so she had me interviewed on his circle. And so now that circle is kind of coming over and joining ours, and I'm kind of joining his. But that's a fantastic group as well. They're doing the same book that we're doing for the Fiction Book Club. They're on book 7 next issue, and I'm on book 2 next issue. But anyhow, are you up for a couple questions?
Absolutely, yeah.
Let's go back to this one from Triple G Farms. He's from around here. He's about an hour up the road. We still have to get together and get a cup of coffee. And I'm probably going to drive up to him because I like the restaurant there in this small town. Okay, so there you go. What are your thoughts on ibogaine for severe PTSD?
So I'm not particularly familiar with that one. I understand it's a psychedelic, is what I'm understanding, right? So let me say first of all that my opinions are my own, do not represent anybody that I have or will work or have worked with in the past. Again, my opinions are my own. The agencies that I've worked for have not done any of these treatments. I do know some in my area that are experimenting with this from a research standpoint, and there is showing good potential for psychedelics, especially like microdosing psychedelics, to do like a reset in the brain. We can definitely talk about more of what's happening in the brain with trauma when we do that follow-up one, Lee.
Okay.
But I would say I've never been involved with this kind of treatment. I've read about it. I've heard about it. I know a little bit about it. I've been to a few trainings where they talked about it, and the research and the results are showing a lot of promise. And that's the extent to what I can comment about it right now.
We had a shooting here in the greater Austin area. Gosh, I think it was Monday or Tuesday night. And they happened to have both the police camera and they had the Ring doorbell camera. But this guy evidently, and they're thinking it is a particular brand of sleeping pill where they start walking in their sleep. And
Oh, yeah.
I forget the name of it.
It was probably Ambien.
It is.
Yeah.
And they think he was on Ambien. They're checking into it. But he's having a conversation with his own Ring doorbell. This is at his own house. He had an AR-15. He said, "Are you ready for this? Do you think you're ready for this?" And just started shooting his own house up like you would not believe.
Yeah.
So police arrived on the scene. They said, "Drop the gun." He turned around with the gun in his hands and they shot him dead.
Oh.
And so, there's questions so that's raising a lot of questions in the community right now about the efficacy of a lot of these medications and the side effects that they're causing and how upsetting it can be to the community at large.
Yeah. That I hate to hear something like that. I know somebody who got in their car and drove on that. And
I've heard of that.
Yeah, and they were in
a case of somebody who got in their car, drove, and ran over a lady pushing a child in a buggy.
Yeah. I know somebody, was actually a friend of mine who was taking that, and he got in his car and drove in like a sleepwalk state and didn't remember driving. Changed his tire. He got a flat tire along the way. Changed his tire. Didn't remember that, and the only reason he was aware of it was like, why is my spare on my tire? And the other one was in the trunk. Why is the spare on the car? And then his regular tire was flat and in the trunk. Yeah, it's interesting stuff. Just please be careful out there, folks.
Golly. So Melanie LaCurcy, I'm going to say, probably. Too many corporate businesses than we really need. Do we really need 4 different yogurt shops in town? And my answer to that is yes. Who was it? Somebody today just put out a video that they got. Oh, I know who it was. It was Pepper Dog. And he was saying that he went to a Walmart. I think it was Pepper Dog. One of the people I follow went to a Walmart and he was told that it was Prepping by Faith. It was Prepping by Faith, that they went to a Walmart and they were told that from now on, I think starting in January, we have to provide our own bags, that they're not going to provide the plastic bags anymore. And they're going all these different things that are just basically got Sam Walton just churning in his grave. And so one of the things I'm going to say is, I think the key thing people look for is service. And I think there are enough of us who are fed up of just being another profit donor rather than being highly valued as a customer and treated as such. So I think I like competition, and I like it when there are a lot of options and I can get the one where I'm going to get the best service. I'll let you.
I think competition is good for the country. And as you know, my wife and I, like I said, we both run a small business. I'm a firm believer. Actually, we were talking about books before we went live, right? And one of the books that I read every few years is 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Have you read that one yet, Lee?
Oh, I'm certified as an instructor in it.
I love it. And so what's habit number 6?
Sharpen the saw.
Synergize, isn't it?
No, that's 7.
Oh, okay. Synergize is 7, right? So that's so every
I
few years.
think.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I think. Let me look it up.
All right. While you're looking that up, I'll talk about Synergize. So every few years, I try to reread that book and try to take something different out of it. And the idea of synergy really appeals to me from a small business standpoint. Of I don't need to compete with other YouTube channels. I don't need to. I do a consulting business for mental health. I don't need to compete with other mental health consultants in my area. I can synergize, right? So I can come on here and I can collaborate with Lee, and we can both mutually benefit, right? So there is what's his name? Nash was the famous mathematician who came up with a mathematical theory about how humans do better when we synergize instead of compete, right? More comes out of that. We get more creative, new ideas, everybody benefits, right? So I got a call recently from one of my former supervisees, somebody that I trained to get her license, and she was asking me about how I run my business, how did I get the business license, all these other things, and I'm more than happy to help. And I will send her plenty of customers because it's a mutually beneficial working relationship, right? There's more than enough work in my city for me. I have to turn people away. I don't have enough time for the amount of people that have called me asking for consulting help or supervision help, right? So synergy, when you think along those lines, instead of I got to eliminate this competition, we were talking about this beforehand, right? Like negative energy, positive energy, right?
Right.
Positive energy is going to yield so much better results all the time. So I think competition is good. And if I was one of those yogurt places, I would reach out to a couple of the other yogurt places and say, hey, let me bring over a little sample of my yogurt, show you these are flavors that I was thinking about. You want to do a collaboration? We mutually support each other. I'll advertise for you. You advertise for me. Maybe we do like a friendly competition. Who sells the most vanilla this month, right? Everybody wins, you know?
Yeah. And by the way, you were right. 6 is synergize and 7 is sharpen the saw.
Okay.
So I have to eat my humble pie.
That's all right.
So yeah, Prepping by Faith says, yeah, that was her video earlier today. She did 2 videos today. So, and they're also talking about not being able to bag for anybody. So if you go through a normal cashier line, there's not going to be a bagger there, even for people like me who are old and decrepit. I am so happy I get to go back to acupuncture on Wednesday, and let me tell you, acupuncture has been so good. They found out that the pain in my leg is because of my spine injury from the Army. Mm-hmm. And so we've been able to get it with the acupuncture to where now, 5 months after the hip replacement, I'm able to walk without a cane. But the pain was so intense, I had to have a cane in order to walk. And but now that I'm back on acupuncture, oh my gosh, I love acupuncture more than drugs.
I've never done it. Does it hurt when they're doing the little needles? It does. It hurts.
Well, let me tell you a secret. When in 1988, I was chosen to go with the Special Forces group to Seoul to do the counter-terrorist stuff for the Seoul Olympics. And so General Han, who was the director of the Korean CIA, expected me to play a round of golf with him. So in the orders that I was told I had to take my golf clubs to Korea. And so they put me up in this real nice hotel that had marble steps. And in Korea, in the fall, the rains come. And so I took a step out on those wet marble steps, fell and broke my ankle. Oof. And I played 9 holes of golf with General Han on a broken ankle. And by the 9th hole, I was using my putter for a cane. To try. He looked at it, he says, "Oh, Mr. Engel, Mr. Your last name, you obviously have a broken ankle." And I said, "Well, General, I believe so." He says, "Well, let me send you into the trainer." So he sent me into the trainer. Trainer said, "No, it's broken." So General Han says, "Well, I'll put you with my driver and he'll drive you to my personal doctor." Well, this is right at the stage where they had, what was the disease from needles and everything? Everybody was dying from.
I'm not sure.
Anyhow, there was a big scare about needles
Yeah.
and sanitary products and everything else. And so he sent me to a Korean doctor, and he did acupuncture on my ankle. The swelling went down. The pain was gone in 15 minutes.
Wow.
He said, your ankle's broken. Now you have to go to a Western doctor and have it fixed. And I
Reset.
said, okay, that's great. So I've been convinced of acupuncture ever since then.
Interesting. Well, I'll keep that in mind.
Okay, and so prepping by faith adds to that if an employee tries to help a senior, that they can be fired. And so that's just
that's really frustrating. It's hard to understand. I mean, I know everything is going to be going towards automation, everything, you know, and the self-checkout lines is just another symptom of that, you know.
And so the problem with that is we're replacing workers with automation, which means we're going to have more workers without jobs.
Yeah.
And so as we continue this automation process, it's going to just there was a book I had to read my freshman year in college, 1970, and it was by Dr. Paul Ehrlich called The Population Bomb. And he kind of predicted that we would reach this critical point on Earth to where we had more human beings than we could sustain with our ecosystems as we had. But although he predicted it would be a little bit earlier in the millennium than where we are, but just unbelievable.
Yeah. Well, and the outcomes of something like that is not good for us peasants. You know, so best case scenario, this is best case scenario. If there's not an attempt to say, okay, well, there's too many peasants, we need to wipe out some of them. The best case scenario, it would be that they'll probably introduce the universal basic income at some point.
And that is nothing but an inflation.
Yeah, it's a problem. It's a problem.
Yeah. I don't, I was watching I was on another channel and saw earlier today, somebody kept pushing for UBI in the chat. And what they don't understand is when you have UBI, so now you have to pay the manufacturers more income. So that increases the cost of the cost of goods sold.
Right.
Then you have to pay more for the drivers who are driving the product to market. Then you have to pay more to the people who are producing the fuel to sell to get the product to market in the vehicle. And so you got all these increased prices. So as the prices go up, that UBI settles down to a point to where you still, if you can only buy half of a Big Mac before UBI, you'll only be able to afford half of a Big Mac after UBI because of the cost of goods sold. And
there's a reason why we as a nation have chosen to do a minimum wage instead of a living wage. Living wage sounds good on paper, except that every time you give somebody an increase, the costs also are going to increase. And so it becomes this runaway inflation thing. It's hard to explain to people who don't want to hear that, no, that wouldn't happen. Yes, it would happen. But maybe if some city or some small country wanted to try it as an experiment, that wouldn't be such a bad thing. But all the mathematical models seem to indicate that it would be runaway inflation if we try to do a living wage, unfortunately.
Thank you, Manny. See what happens to your mind when you hit 70? You just forget little things like that.
Oh, it was HIV/AIDS. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
AIDS.
yeah.
Okay.
So I saw another one up here. I wanted to kind of John Poole. Welcome, John. And I hope you will subscribe to a lot of the people here who we have in our chat, as well as to Prepping with Sarge. But yeah, and I think that's the absolute truth here. That the solution to the overpopulation, the solution to lack of resources, the processes, and everything else has always been depopulation and depopulation through war, and that seems to be where we're heading. Unfortunately. And then of course, then you have the only lottery that I've ever won. I wanted to tell, yesterday, Alaska Prepper had a fantastic deal. He gave away 25 fantastic gifts. And I wanted to tell him the only lottery I've ever won in my life was in 1970. And it was a 1-year unpaid vacation to Vietnam.
Yeah.
And so I would like to win another lottery, but not of that caliber.
Right.
So we'll see. And then prepping by faith. I mean, yeah, she's got it absolutely right there too. What do you think about that?
Yeah. Yeah, it's unfortunately this has been history of the world. You have kings and peasants, and we are the peasants.
Yeah, and I see this division too, to where we used to have, if we take a look at the standard bell-shaped curve. So let's say that you've got that plus or minus one sigma, which was the great middle class. 68% of the population fit within that great middle class.
And the sign that a country is being run well is when there's a middle class that's thriving. Absolutely.
And then you had the 16%, plus two, plus three sigma on the top, which were the wealthy, and then you had the poor, the plus or the minus two or three sigma, who were the poor. Right. And I see that the divide is happening, and so now that median is becoming expanded, and we're pushing everybody out to the fringes, so that the middle class is evaporating. We're becoming divided between the rich and the poor.
Right.
You,
100% agree. Yeah, 100% agree. And that's also part of the frustrating thing. Again, as somebody who kind of sits in the middle, I don't consider myself either a Republican or a Democrat. I reject both parties because both parties have never done a darn thing to help me. And but I can also say that I see value in ideas in both parties. Absolutely. Yeah. So I can listen to that somebody who's a Republican may have great ideas and somebody who's a Democrat may have great ideas. And the problem is nobody's listening to each other, right? And so we get into this battle of left versus right when it really should be poor versus rich. But when they keep it as left versus right, people don't realize the real game.
I think the
not
greatest.
Poor. Let me say rich versus everybody else. Not even poor. Rich versus everybody else.
I think the greatest eye opener I've had just happened in the last 72 hours. And so we put out this thing called the National Labor Relations Act of 1943, I think it is, or 47, that talks about unionization. So there's been a pendulum on unionization for a long time. So the NLRA is what we're currently under. And it says that if management and employees can't come to an agreement, okay, then the president can basically intervene with a 90-day cool down period, and then they're forced to basically accept the contract. Yeah. And that didn't happen. The president didn't want to exercise his authority, so he kind of shoved it off to Congress. Well, here's the dilemma, okay, in the fact that you've got a party that says we have always been pro-employee and anti-employer or anti-big company, and they received the vast majority of their funding from the unions. And here they are passing a bill that to the detriment of the unions. Yeah. And then this other company says, hey, and supposedly they have the support of big business, although they don't. It's really kind of in between. And but then they voted. 49 members voted for that same thing, which says that they didn't care about the employees or the business either, that they're going to impose their own will upon them. And so, I think what we see is 99 out of 100 senators basically said, we don't care what the employees want. We don't care what the government, what the business wants. You're going to have what we want.
Yeah, don't disrupt our lifestyle. That's what it is. Don't disrupt our lifestyle. Yeah.
And I, just that government super imposition of their own will on everybody else is just unbelievable.
Yep.
Okay, so Manny has another go in here. If people are being replaced by robots, you will need UBI. But the question then becomes one, Manny, of will people be able to afford, even with UBI, what the cost of goods are? If we have robot production,
you'll own nothing and you'll be happy for it.
Yeah. What were the slogans in 1984?
Yeah.
Gosh, that's so appropriate.
Obey.
Yeah. Big Brother's watching was number one.
Yeah. So Manny, I think it's probably at some point in the future. I don't know. I can't tell if it's 5 years, 50 years, or 500 years. We are hitting that point that we were talking about earlier with like peak human population and the effect on everything, right? Like water, just fresh water is already becoming a problem in many parts of the United States. Now, it's always been a problem in other parts of the world. Now it's becoming a problem in the United States, right? Where there's going to be sooner rather than later major conflicts over water rights. That's coming, right? It'll start with court fights, but it could get worse than that. So the resources versus peak human population, eventually if we live long enough as a species, it hits a tipping point. And that's what I'm saying, is those of us who are in the peasant class, the outcome doesn't look good for us. The best case scenario, and it's not a good one, the best case scenario, it would be a universal basic income at that point. And that's not a good outcome either,
That's true. Looky here. You need to say hello to this guy.
I know Bacon.
Yeah, he's one of your moderators.
Yep. Actually, I forgot. I need to catch his stream. I didn't. He usually streams later on after me last night. But it's good to see you, Bacon. Yeah. It's probably going to come to that. And even like I used to think early in my career, like I have one of those. I used to think narcissistically that I have one of those jobs that could never be replaced by a robot because a robot could never be a good therapist. Well, as it turns out, the AIs are getting so sophisticated that you could have a phone conversation with an AI this is not the future. And if you didn't know, you wouldn't be able to tell if it was a human or an AI, right? And I'm talking about the really advanced ones, like that Google's playing around with.
Yeah, if you've got the right decision tree set up to ask the right questions and no,
and psychology is a bit of a pseudoscience, but there is there is kind of, like you said, a decision tree to it, right? Like, so we know that depression is caused by XYZ factors, right? And so how do we correct depression? Well, we can apply some medications to correct the issues in the neurotransmitters and in the synapses, and we can teach somebody behavioral skills for getting their dopamine production going good. And we can teach somebody how to change their thinking, which will also increase their dopamine production, right? So I can do that as a therapist. All of those things could be replaced with automation. There's nothing that says that it couldn't.
Oh, yep, that's absolutely. So going back to the our growth and everything else, we went down to Camp Mabry today. They have our favorite eggnog, and so we wanted to go down there and get our favorite eggnog. And we got down to close to downtown Austin, and we looked in the skyscrapers that are going up, and so my wife and I were talking about it. And number one, do we have a water shortage? We're in a drought. How are we going to provide water to Austin is one of the Austin metropolitan area is one of the 3 top growing areas in the U.S. And so how are we going to get water to these people? Number two, the vehicular road structure in Austin is considered the worst in the United States. We have the second worst stretch of road, other than Interstate 10 through downtown Houston. Interstate 35 through downtown Austin is absolute worst. So how are these people going to get to and from work? And, we just brought in Tesla just close to us. Now they're building a new Samsung facility. I mean, it is just expanding like you would not believe. We don't have the water to support it. We don't have the roads to support it. And where in the world, if we are consuming 98% of our average production of electricity, and we're not allowed to build any new power plants, where's the electricity going to come from?
Right.
And it doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah. I just got back from Phoenix a couple months ago, visiting my brother down there. And I was asking him about, what's the water situation down here? And he said, oh, it's not good. And I said, well, what's their plan to fix it? And he said, there isn't one. They're just bickering,
Well, let's get back to we've only got about 8 minutes left in the chat. And I want to get back to such a great discussion. We could keep this going for another hour, but I do want to get it back a little bit on the prepping focus. So we talked about the primary things you would do to prepare for a possible or an imminent, let's call it, recession, possible depression. Is that wording acceptable?
Yeah, definitely. So just kind of circle back to what we were talking about. Build your food pantry. Pay down as much of your heavy debt as you could. The high interest debt. Build a savings as best as you can. And if you have to make some cuts in things that you normally are enjoying right now, I'd say it is worth it to do that right now, because I can't predict the future any more than anybody else, but I certainly believe that it's going to get worse in 2023. I'll be pleasantly surprised to be wrong. I will eat my humble pie and be happy about it if I'm wrong, but I don't think I'm going to be.
So one of my favorite channels to watch is this guy by the name of Prepping by Sarge. And whenever he does an interview, he usually ends it the same way almost all the time. So are you ready for a Prepping by Sarge closure?
Okay. All right.
Star Wars or Star Trek?
Star Wars for me, but I like both. Star Wars.
Okay. What's your favorite book?
The Killer Angels.
Ooh, that's
Have you read that one?
No.
It's a Civil War. Real quick, it's a Civil War historical fiction, but it's based on the diaries and the journals and the letters home from the generals and the officers, not just the generals, the officers too.
Wow. Okay. Yep. Favorite knife?
Killer Angels. Check it out.
Favorite knife?
Right now it's my SE4. I just got that at Georgia Bushcraft, but there's a place in Sarge's heart for all knives.
I was telling on my channel that my SE4, when I opened it, I'm not a flat grind guy. I prefer a Scandi grind, but the SEs come with the flat grind.
Yeah.
But the one thing I don't like about it is how hard it is to get it out of that
the sheath.
Yeah. Sheath. And it makes a very obvious clicking noise when you put it back in. So stealth is not something you want with
no.
But I will give them credit. I cut the living daylights out of my finger getting it out of the sheath. It comes factory razor sharp.
It is so sharp. I cut myself the first time I was using it. I was just kind of messing around making a little feather stick, and I accidentally cut myself, and I was like, whoa. Yeah.
Yep. Okay, so how about a pocket dump? Tell us what you carry for EDC.
All right. I had a feeling we were going to do this, so I grabbed it. I grabbed the stuff that I had in my pocket earlier today. I got my Spyderco Tenacious. Whoops, there we go.
Ooh.
Yeah. I've got this is the, what's the name of it? PowerTech Saber.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, you talked about that last night.
Yeah. Got my handy dandy Zippo that I've had since college. And
you don't smoke?
I do not. No. And I've got my Morgan 1878, which, by the way, whoops, there we go. There's the camera. Yeah. I'm doing a giveaway for that. Yeah, people can watch the live stream from not this Friday, the past Friday, where I tell you how you can be entered into that one. 1878 Morgan.
Sounds good. So Manny wants to ask True Light.
True Light?
True Light, that's a form of flashlight. I don't have any True Lights.
I don't have any of those. I don't know. I can't comment if I probably would like it.
I don't have any O lights either. So anyhow, Manny, my go-to light was a company by the name of Nebo, N-E-B-O. And every flashlight, I have a flashlight in every room. Sometimes I have two flashlights in the same room. Everything I had was Nebo. They have some fantastic lanterns, some fantastic on stand, 2000 lumen garage lights and everything. I mean, everything I have is Nebo. But lately, I've had a problem with my favorite, which is called a Slim, and the on-off switch on it, and they haven't made good for that. So when I went to Camp Mabry today, I bought this one. So I'm kind of getting away from Nebo and going towards something else. This was sold in the military paraphernalia stuff. And the reason I bought it is because it has a red blackout lens. So in the military, quite often what we'll do is if we're going into blackout conditions, we'll go to a red lens instead of a white lens and not give ourselves away.
Also preserves your night vision, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Nebo Poppy is a good light. We have several of those around the house. The little lanterns that pop down.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Nebo Poppy. Yeah.
So last question, Kohler Pepper, you've seen a lot over the years. Do you think the current scenario is the one that breaks the camel's back? I'm not one to predict too much. I just like to prepare for, but I'll tell you what, I don't think that I have been as anxious to prepare, let's put it that way, as since November of 1962, when I first got into this, and I was living at about 5 miles off the end of the runway at Biggs Air Force Base and saw the B-52s taking off in expectation of a retaliatory strike. So I am highly concerned and keep my nose to the news about what's going on. And I have a tendency to agree with Sarge. I think we've got a couple things happening all at once. They're going to be going to cause concern for a lot of people. I think we've got the grand solar minimum happening. We have a war going on, and that war has caused shortages in food supplies. We also have, we're recovering from the lockdown, which caused a shortage in food supplies. I think that we're going to have critical shortages of food supplies here in the very near future. I'm not going to tell you when, or I'm not a prophet, but anytime you have the amount of spending that our government has done, and the only thing that's holding the dollar up, and Sarge and I were talking about this earlier before the video, the only thing that's propping our dollar up right now is the fact that we are the world currency, and we're better off than any other country on earth economically right now, financially. But that does not mean that we're in a good position. We are going to pay the pauper here very, very shortly. And I think the whole world is going to go into a cataclysm. And, I'm just afraid of that. Yeah, the Pioneer Spirit, the magnetic pole reversal, that's something else. Manny, yes, I prefer headlamps to handheld lamps. Everything inside the house is handheld, but in my EDC, get home bag, my bug out bag, all that kinds of stuff, it's all stuff that, as a matter of fact, just 1 second, and then we'll close it out.
So just to kind of jump on what he was saying there about do I think is the current situation the one that breaks the camel's back? My personal feeling is no. I think that we have a pretty the recession thing right now is bad. If we get drawn into conflict, then I would reassess my no for sure. And I think there's a risk here with the amount of involvement that we have with what's going on in other parts of the world, because so just to keep it really, really basic, if you take somebody who likes controlling things, who has access to nuclear power, and you back them into a corner where they feel like there's no way out, what do you think they're going to do? Right?
Yep.
Do they? And if we know, if it's somebody that we know also doesn't care about the consequences to anybody, including their own people, what do you think you're going to do? What do you think they're going to do? So, without us even saying it, what the answer to that is, right? So the further we get either drawn into that or even perceived to be involved with it, there is some risk. So are we in big SHTF right now or Tiawaki? My personal answer is no, but I reserve the right to reassess that if we get drawn further into this conflict.
I think we're on a teeter-totter. Mm-hmm. And we're getting closer and closer to that middle point where one more step and that teeter-totter tilts the other direction, and which is not a good direction. Yeah. Now, how far away or how big of steps are we taking? Are we taking baby steps or are we taking giant steps to get there? That's determined by a couple crazy people that we don't know what they're going to do, how they're going to act, or anything else. This whole thing about what's going on as far as what Sarge is talking about is, we've got a couple key players who I'm not so certain they have all their senses or faculties about them. And I see them sitting at a table in Las Vegas playing Texas Hold'em, and they're all in.
Yeah.
And, and then when it turns out you have a better hand than they do, they're going to stand up and shoot it out. And my personal opinion.
And any animal, if you back any animal into a corner and it feels like it has no other options, it will fight like it's never fought before. And I don't think that we should be backing so to speak, any animals into the corner. Right.
We should not be throwing any threats out there. That's for
right.
Sure.
We got to if we want to avoid World War III, we have to give people a chance to save face. And by people, I mean other nations.
And we have to be the voice of calm.
Yeah. You have to give them a chance to walk away saving some face, or the outcome's not going to be anything that anybody likes.
So do me a favor. We are going to have part 2 of this interview with Prepping with Sarge. we're going to focus that entire interview on something that really scares me, and that is when all this happens, people are not going to rapidly adjust to what it is, and there's going to be some people who just won't make it. There are going to be some who are going to make it quicker than others. And so what can we do to help the other people around us? What can we do for ourselves to help ourselves to be in that group that doesn't lose it when it happens? And how can we help those around us who have slightly lost it? And then what are we going to do with the people who have totally lost it? So, kind of those three categories, and how do we prepare? How do we live in that kind of a world where people's mental capacities have been traumatized to an extent to where they may not be effective? So we'll give you the dates on that. Thank you so much. Wow, what a great evening. Thank you.
My pleasure, Lee.
I'm sorry?
I said my pleasure, Lee.
Oh, yeah. As soon as it's over, I want to get back and we'll get that date figured out between the two of us. And so remember, everybody, we're all in this together so we can come out the other side together. Please be kind, polite, and respectful with each other. No arguing. So as Moses told the Levites, this is how you shall bless the Israelites. Say to them, the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord let his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord look upon you kindly and give you peace. So good night, everybody. Thank you so much for being here and being part of us. Take care. Bye-bye.